The wagon lurched to a stop in front of the sprawling ranch house, and Amelia Grayson's stomach twisted as she saw the dozen men standing in the yard, their eyes already assessing her like livestock at auction. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia to Fort Laramie, Wyoming, answering an advertisement for domestic work that promised fair wages and respectable employment. But the foreman who had collected her from town had made it clear during the dusty ride that her expectations were wildly misplaced. "Fields need hands more than the house needs another skirt," he had said, spitting tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. "Owner's sister runs the kitchen. You'll be picking rocks and pulling weeds with the rest of them." It was June of 1876, and Amelia had left behind a city suffocating her with its narrow opportunities for unmarried women. Her parents had died the previous winter, leaving her with nothing but debts and the grim prospect of factory work that would break her body before she turned 30. The West had seemed like salvation, a place where a woman with courage and determination could forge a new life. Now, watching the ranch hands exchange knowing glances as the foreman helped her down from the wagon, she wondered if she had simply traded one form of servitude for another. "This is the new girl," the foreman announced, his hand lingering too long on her elbow. "She'll be bunking with the other field workers. Somebody show her where to stow her things." Amelia pulled her arm away and straightened her travel-worn dress, refusing to let these men see her fear. She was 22 years old, educated enough to read and write with fluency, and strong enough to have helped her mother with laundry work when times were desperate. If they wanted her in the fields, she would work the fields. She had not come this far to surrender her dignity. "Hold on now, Garrett." The voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a knife through butter, quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. The men fell silent and stepped aside as a tall figure emerged from the barn, leading a magnificent bay gelding. Amelia's breath caught despite herself. The man was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty work clothes and leather gloves, but he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who knew his own worth and did not need to prove it. "Xavier Brennan," the foreman said, his tone shifting to something more cautious. "Your father said she was to work wherever we needed hands." "My father is laid up with gout and has not set foot in the south pasture in 3 years," Xavier replied, tying the horse to the fence rail with practiced efficiency. "I run this ranch, Garrett, and I say we do not assign people to work before we have even asked what they are capable of doing or willing to do." He turned his attention to Amelia, and she felt the full weight of his gaze. "You are Amelia Grayson." "I am. You came here expecting domestic work." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "The advertisement specified housekeeping and cooking. I can do both. I can also do laundry, mending, and basic bookkeeping." "Can you ride?" The question surprised her. "I have ridden, yes. Not recently." Xavier nodded slowly, seeming to consider something. "The truth is, Miss Grayson, this ranch does need field hands. We are short several workers who moved on to the mining camps. But we also need someone who can help with the books and correspondence, because my aunt is 70 years old and her eyesight is failing." He stripped off his gloves and tucked them into his belt. "So here is what I propose. You take today to rest from your journey. Tomorrow, you look at both the field work and the housework, and you decide which you prefer. Or if you want to do some combination of both, you will do whatever you choose." The foreman's jaw tightened. "Xavier, your father, my father, will respect my decisions regarding the operation of this ranch, just as I have respected his for the past 25 years, Xavier said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Miss Grayson, I apologize for the confusion and for any disrespect you have experienced. One of the hands will show you to a private room in the ranch house. You will take your meals with the family, not in the bunkhouse." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Xavier is fine." He retrieved his horse's reins and swung into the saddle with fluid grace. "Welcome to the Broken Bee Ranch, Miss Grayson. I hope you will find it suits you." With that, he touched his hat brim and rode toward the pastures, leaving the foreman fuming and Amelia standing in the yard with her small trunk, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. A young man with red hair and friendly eyes approached her, grinning. "Do not mind Garrett. He has been sour ever since Xavier started making changes around here. I am Danny. Let me help you with your trunk." "Thank you, Danny." Amelia watched Xavier's retreating figure, the way he sat his horse like he was born in the saddle. "Is he always like that?" "Like what?" "Fair." Danny laughed as he hefted her trunk. "Xavier is the best man I have ever worked for, and I have worked for some real bastards, pardon my language. His father is old-fashioned and set in his ways, but Xavier believes in treating people right. Says a ranch runs better when folks are doing work they are good at and want to do, not just whatever they are told." He led her toward the ranch house, a sprawling structure of timber and stone. "You picked a good time to arrive. There is a dance in town this Saturday, and the whole outfit usually goes. You should come." "I will think about it," Amelia said, though her mind was still on the man who had defended her right to choose her own path. In Philadelphia, no one had ever asked her what she wanted. She had been told to be grateful for whatever scraps of work came her way, to accept whatever terms were offered, to know her place. Xavier Brennan had looked at her like she was a person whose preferences mattered, and that simple act of respect had cracked something open in her chest. The room Danny showed her to was small but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the western pastures. After he left, Amelia unpacked her few belongings and washed the travel dust from her face and hands using the pitcher and basin provided. Through the window, she could see Xavier in the distance, working alongside his men to repair a section of fence. He had rolled up his sleeves, and even from here she could see the easy strength in his movements. She told herself not to be foolish. He was her employer, and more importantly, he was clearly a man of property and standing. She was a penniless woman from the East with nothing to offer but her labor. The fact that he had treated her with basic human decency did not mean anything beyond his own good character. She would do well to remember that. But that night at dinner, seated at a long table with Xavier, his elderly Aunt Margaret, his father Thomas, who regarded her with skeptical silence, and several of the senior ranch hands, Amelia found herself drawn into conversation with Xavier about the books she had read and the places she had seen. He had spent time in Denver and Cheyenne, and he spoke of the changing West with a mixture of nostalgia and pragmatic acceptance. "The railroad has changed everything," he said, passing her the potatoes. "My father built this ranch when Fort Laramie was still a major military post, and the Oregon Trail ran right past our door. Now the Army is focused farther south. The trail is obsolete, and the whole territory is filling up with settlers and businesses. We have to change with it or die out." "Progress always displaces someone," Amelia observed. "In Philadelphia, the factories brought work but destroyed the old craft guilds. My father was a bookbinder who could not compete with mechanized printing." Xavier's expression softened with understanding. "I am sorry for your loss. Danny mentioned your parents passed recently, last winter." She took a sip of water to ease the tightness in her throat. "I am the only one left." "Then you have already shown remarkable courage by coming here alone," Xavier said. The West is not easy, but it rewards determination. I think you will do well, Miss Grayson, whatever you decide to do. His Aunt Margaret, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun, spoke up from the other end of the table. The girl has sense, Xavier. I can see it in her. If she wants to help me with the household accounts, I would be grateful. My eyes are not what they were, and I have been making mistakes. Only if Miss Grayson wishes to, Xavier said, looking at Amelia. No pressure. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with the sounds of the ranch settling around her, Amelia thought about choices and freedom. She had expected to be told what to do, where to go, how to be useful. Instead, Xavier Brennan had given her autonomy, and the gift of that was almost overwhelming. She fell asleep with the window open, breathing in the sage-scented air and thinking about storm-gray eyes, and a voice that had made her feel seen for the first time in years. The next morning, she rose early and found her way to the kitchen, where Margaret was already preparing breakfast for the household. "You are up early," the older woman said with approval. "Help me with these biscuits if you like." Amelia rolled up her sleeves and set to work, falling into the familiar rhythm of kneading dough. Margaret was a good teacher, patient but exacting, and they worked companionably while dawn light filled the kitchen. When the ranch hands began filing in for breakfast, Amelia helped serve, learning names and faces. Most of the men were polite, a few were curious, and Garrett the foreman remained coldly neutral. Xavier arrived last, smelling of horses and hay. "Good morning, Aunt Margaret, Miss Grayson." His eyes lingered on her flour-dusted hands. "I see you have already been put to work." "I volunteered," Amelia said. "Your aunt is teaching me to make proper biscuits. Hers are the best in Wyoming territory," Xavier said with obvious affection for the older woman. "After breakfast, if you are still willing, I thought I might show you around the ranch, give you a sense of what the different jobs entail." "I would like that very much." An hour later, she found herself walking beside Xavier through the various outbuildings and pastures, learning the scope of the Broken Bee Ranch. It was larger than she had realized, sprawling across several thousand acres with cattle, horses, hayfields, and vegetable gardens. He explained the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, the spring calving and branding, the summer haying, the fall roundup, the long, hard winters. "Field work is not easy," he said honestly as they stood at the edge of a newly planted hay meadow. "It is hot, back-breaking labor, and you would be out here from dawn to dusk during harvest. But some people prefer it because once the workday ends, your time is your own. And the housework, also demanding but different. My aunt needs help with cooking, cleaning, mending, and increasingly with the accounts and correspondence. She gets tired easily now. It would mean longer hours but perhaps more varied work." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want you to understand that whatever you choose, you will be paid the same wage. I do not value one kind of labor over another. The ranch needs both to function." Amelia looked out across the rolling grassland, watching the morning sun paint the distant mountains gold. "May I ask you something, Mr. Brennan?" "Xavier." "Xavier." His name felt strange and intimate on her tongue. "Why does it matter to you what I choose? Most employers would simply assign me wherever they needed workers and be done with it." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My mother died when I was 12. Before she passed, she told me that the measure of a man is how he treats people who have no power over him. She said that true strength is not about control, but about giving others the freedom to be who they are meant to be." He met Amelia's eyes. "I have tried to live by that. I have seen too many ranchers and businessmen treat their workers like property, and I have seen how that poisons everything it touches. I want the broken bee to be different. Something in Amelia's chest tightened and loosened all at once. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was extraordinary. Xavier's expression softened with old grief. You remind me of her a little, actually. She also came out here from the East and had to fight for every scrap of respect she got. She never backed down, never made herself smaller to please others. I admired that about her. The comparison made Amelia flush with unexpected pleasure. I hope I can live up to that. I think you already are. Xavier's smile was genuine and warm. Take your time deciding, Miss Grayson. There is no rush. But Amelia had already made up her mind. If your aunt truly needs help, I would like to work in the house. I miss being around someone who wants to teach me things. And I must confess, I have always been better with numbers than with crops. Then it is settled. Xavier looked pleased. I will tell Garrett to stop planning which fields to assign you to. He is not going to be happy, but he will adjust. Why does he dislike the idea of me working in the house? Because you are young and pretty, and he thinks you are trying to seduce your way into an easier life, Xavier said bluntly. Garrett is good at his job but narrow-minded about some things. Do not let him bother you. He answers to me, not the other way around. The casual way Xavier had called her pretty made Amelia's pulse skip, but she forced herself to focus on the practical. I will prove my worth through my work. You already have, just by being willing to be here. Xavier started walking back toward the ranch house. Come on. I will introduce you properly to my aunt, and we can discuss what your days will look like. The next several weeks fell into a rhythm that Amelia found deeply satisfying. She rose early to help Margaret prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings working on the ranch accounts and correspondence while the older woman rested. The books were in greater disarray than Xavier had let on, and Amelia spent hours reconstructing supply orders and tracking expenses. She discovered that Garrett had been overordering certain supplies and potentially skimming profits, and when she brought this to Xavier's attention, he dealt with the situation swiftly and quietly. Afternoons were for cooking, preserving food from the garden, mending clothes and tack, and all the thousand small tasks that kept a household running. Margaret was a patient teacher who shared not just skills but stories, telling Amelia about the early days of the ranch and the wild, dangerous beauty of the frontier. Evenings, Amelia often found herself on the wide front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the ranch hands finish their work, and the sun paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Xavier frequently joined her, and they would talk about everything and nothing, about books and politics, ranching and dreams, the past and the uncertain future. You miss Philadelphia? He asked her one evening in late July as they watched a storm build over the mountains. I miss having family, Amelia admitted, but I do not miss the city itself. There is a freedom here I never had back east, room to breathe. The West gets into your blood, Xavier said. Once it does, cities feel like cages. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I am glad you chose to stay. You have made a real difference here, Amelia. My aunt is happier than she has been in years, and the books have never been in better order. I am glad I stayed too. She meant it with her whole heart. In the months since her arrival, the Broken Bee Ranch had begun to feel like home in a way Philadelphia never had. And Xavier had become something she did not dare examine too closely, a presence that made her days brighter and her heart beat faster. The dance Danny had mentioned came and went, and Amelia attended with the rest of the ranch household, wearing her best dress and trying not to notice how many women in Fort Laramie looked at Xavier with open interest. He danced with her twice, his hand warm and sure on her waist, and the brief intimacy of those dances haunted her for days afterward. August brought the hardest work of the year, with haying in full swing and every person on the ranch pressed into service. Despite her house duties, Amelia found herself helping in the kitchen around the clock, preparing enormous meals for the crews working from dawn to dark. Xavier was everywhere, organizing the work, filling in wherever he was needed, pushing himself harder than anyone. She saw him less during those weeks, and she was surprised by how much she missed their evening conversations. One afternoon, she brought water out to the haying crews and found Xavier stripped to the waist, his skin bronzed and gleaming with sweat as he forked hay onto the wagon. The sight made her stop in her tracks, heat flooding her face that had nothing to do with the August sun. He saw her and straightened, wiping his forehead with his arm. "You are a blessed sight, Amelia Grayson," he said, coming over to take a dipper of water. "It has got to be 95 degrees out here." "Drink slowly," she cautioned, trying not to stare at the lean muscle of his chest and arms. "You will make yourself sick." He obeyed, then poured a second dipper over his head, shaking the water from his hair like a dog. Droplets scattered across Amelia's dress and she laughed despite herself. "You are terrible." "I am hot and tired and there are 3 more hours of daylight," Xavier said, but he was smiling. "Thank you for bringing the water. You did not have to walk all the way out here." "I wanted to." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, and their eyes met. Something passed between them, electric and undeniable, and Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Amelia," Xavier began, but Danny interrupted from the wagon, calling that they were ready to move to the next field. The moment broke. Xavier handed her the dipper with obvious reluctance. "I should get back to work." "Of course." Amelia stepped back, her heart pounding. "I will see you at dinner. Count on it." He held her gaze a moment longer, then turned back to the hay wagon, and Amelia walked back to the house with shaking hands, wondering if she had imagined the heat in his eyes. That night at dinner, Xavier's father Thomas finally broke his months-long silence toward her. "You have done good work with the accounts, Miss Grayson," he said grudgingly. "Better than I expected from an Easterner." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Thomas is trying to say you have earned your place here," Margaret said with a sharp look at her brother. "Some of us knew that months ago." Xavier, freshly washed and dressed in clean clothes, caught Amelia's eye across the table and gave her a small, private smile that made her toes curl in her boots. She was in dangerous territory, she knew. Falling for her employer was foolish and could only end badly. But her heart, it seemed, did not care about practical considerations. She had never felt about anyone the way she felt about Xavier Brennan, had never known this aching awareness of another person's presence, this desperate wanting to be near him. After dinner, she escaped to the porch, needing air and space to clear her head. She had been there only a few minutes when she heard the door open behind her. She did not need to turn to know it was Xavier. She could feel him the way she imagined people felt approaching storms. "You have been avoiding me," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "I have been working. Amelia." He waited until she looked at him. "Did I do something to make you uncomfortable? This afternoon in the field?" "No." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You did nothing wrong, Xavier. I am just being foolish." About what? She should lie. She should make some excuse and retreat to her room and rebuild the professional distance that was supposed to exist between them. But she was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being what others expected instead of who she was. "About you," she said. "I am being foolish about you." Xavier went very still. "Foolish how?" "The way a woman is foolish when she forgets her place and starts having inappropriate feelings for her employer," Amelia said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is wrong. I know I should not. But I cannot seem to help it, and I thought you should know so you can dismiss me if you want to, before I make this any more awkward than it already is. Amelia, look at me. Xavier's voice was rough. Please. She forced her eyes up to his face and found him staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath. Do you really think, he said slowly, that I have been spending every evening talking with you for months because I am just being polite? That I dance with you at town socials because I feel obligated? That I notice every time you smile, every time you laugh, every time you walk into a room because I am your employer and nothing more? Hope flared in her chest, almost painful. Xavier, I have been half out of my mind for weeks trying to figure out if you felt anything for me beyond gratitude and friendship, he continued, stepping closer. I did not want to say anything because you work here, and I never wanted you to feel pressured or trapped. Your freedom to choose has always been more important to me than my own wants. But if you are saying what I think you are saying, I am falling in love with you, Amelia whispered. I think I have been since the day you told me I could choose my own work. Xavier's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they blazed with something that made her knees weak. I have been in love with you since you stood in that yard covered in dust and refused to be diminished by Garrett's nonsense. I looked at you and thought, there she is. The woman I have been waiting for, Xavier. His name came out like a prayer. I have nothing. No money, no family, no prospects. I should not. You have everything that matters, he interrupted, reaching out to cup her face with both hands. His palms were calloused and warm against her skin. You are brilliant and brave and kind. You make my aunt laugh. You run this household with more skill than anyone I have ever seen, and you look at me like I hung the moon. Amelia Grayson, I do not give a damn about money or prospects. I only care about you. Will you let me court you properly? With everyone knowing my intentions and you knowing that I am hoping eventually to make you my wife. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she laughed through them. Yes. Yes, Xavier, I will. He bent and kissed her then, soft and reverent, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Amelia's hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself to him as the world spun and righted itself into something new and wonderful. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I am going to do this right, he promised. I am going to court you the way you deserve. Take you on proper outings, bring you flowers, ask your permission for every step. You are not going to wonder for 1 second how I feel about you or what my intentions are. I already do not wonder, Amelia said, smiling up at him. But I will not object to flowers. He laughed, the sound full of joy, and kissed her again. From inside the house, Amelia heard Margaret's voice saying something approving, and she realized the older woman had probably been watching from the window. The thought made her blush, but she could not bring herself to care. She was in Xavier's arms and he loved her, and the future that had seemed so uncertain and frightening now stretched before her full of possibility. The rest of August and all of September passed in a golden haze. Xavier courted her with an attentiveness that made her heart ache, stealing moments alone with her whenever he could, bringing her wildflowers from the meadows, taking her riding on Sunday afternoons when the work eased enough to allow it. He held her hand during evening walks, kissed her goodnight on the porch with a sweetness that left her longing for more, and made sure everyone on the ranch and in Fort Laramie knew that Amelia Grayson was his intended. Margaret was thrilled, claiming she had seen this coming from the first week and had been praying for it ever since. Thomas was more reserved, but acknowledged that his son could do far worse than a hard-working woman with sense and skill. The ranch hands teased Xavier mercilessly, but it was good-natured, and several of them told Amelia privately that they had never seen their boss so happy. Garrett left the ranch in early October, taking a job at a neighboring spread, and Xavier replaced him with a younger man named Sam who respected Amelia's position in the household and treated the other workers fairly. The change improved the atmosphere on the ranch considerably. In late October, as the aspens turned gold and the first hard frosts arrived, Xavier took Amelia riding up into the foothills. They stopped at a high meadow with a view that stretched for miles. The ranch spread out below them like a promise. He helped her down from her horse and then, to her shock, dropped to one knee. "I know we have not been courting long by Eastern standards," he said, pulling a ring from his pocket. It was simple, a gold band with a small sapphire that caught the autumn light. "But I have known since the day we met that you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. I love you, Amelia. I love your strength and your laughter and the way you make everything around you better just by being in it. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I build a life with?" "Yes," Amelia said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Xavier pressed his lips to her forehead. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "You already do," Amelia whispered. "Every single day." They were married in Fort Laramie on a cold, clear day in November, in the small church with half the town in attendance. Amelia wore a dress of deep blue silk that Margaret helped her make, and Xavier wore his best suit with a string tie and looked so handsome that Amelia's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables of food and music provided by a trio of fiddlers from town. Amelia danced until her feet ached, swept around the floor by Xavier, and then by a succession of well-wishers. But always her eyes found her husband's across the room, and always he was watching her with a look that made her blood warm. Late in the evening, Xavier drew her away from the celebration, leading her through the house to the room they would now share, the largest bedroom on the second floor that he had prepared for them. Someone, probably Margaret, had filled it with candles and late-season roses. The bed was piled with quilts and a fire crackled in the hearth. Xavier closed the door behind them and turned to face her, suddenly uncertain. "Amelia, if you want to wait—" "I do not want to wait," she said, reaching up to unknot his tie. "I am your wife now, Xavier. I want all of it." "All of you." He caught her hands and brought them to his lips. "I have never done this before. I am probably going to be terrible at it." The admission surprised her. "Truly, I wanted to wait for the right person." His eyes searched hers. "I am glad I did." "I have not either," Amelia confessed. "We will figure it out together." And they did, with patience and laughter and moments of breathless wonder. Xavier undressed her slowly, reverently, as though she were something precious. And when they finally came together in the big bed, it was clumsy and sweet and utterly perfect. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Amelia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss and grief, the desperate gamble of coming west, the fear and uncertainty of that first day when she thought she would be just another nameless worker in the fields. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About choices," Amelia said. "About how you gave me the power to choose my own path and how that changed everything." "You chose me," Xavier said, wonder in his voice. Out of everything you could have done, everywhere you could have gone, you chose me." "I chose you," Amelia agreed, "because you saw me as a person, not a commodity. Because you treated me with respect before you ever loved me. Because you are the best man I have ever known." Xavier pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I am going to spend every day earning that faith you have in me." "You already have," she whispered. Their first winter as a married couple was hard, with blizzards that lasted days and temperatures that dropped below zero. But the ranch house was warm, and Amelia had never been happier. She and Xavier settled into a partnership that worked in every way, managing the ranch together, making decisions jointly, building something that was truly theirs. Margaret taught Amelia everything she knew about ranching and frontier life, passing down decades of wisdom. And by spring, Amelia felt like she had lived in Wyoming her whole life. In April, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, pulling him aside into their room and speaking the words quietly, watching his face transform with joy. He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his arms going around her waist, and she heard him murmur a prayer of thanksgiving. When he stood up, there were tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in every word. "Amelia, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed her softly. "You have given me everything, Amelia Brennan, everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I needed." Their son was born in January of 1878 during a lull between storms. The birth was hard and long, and there were moments when Amelia thought she might not survive it, but Margaret was there and a doctor from Fort Laramie, and finally, after hours of struggle, she heard a baby's cry. Xavier, who had been banished from the room but kept breaking back in anyway, was at her side immediately, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed their son in her arms. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one careful finger. "Amelia, he is perfect." "Nathan," Amelia said, the name coming to her as naturally as breathing. "Nathan Xavier Brennan." "Nathan," Xavier repeated, testing it. "I love it. I love you. God, Amelia, I love you so much." Nathan was a healthy, loud baby who quickly became the center of the household. Margaret doted on him shamelessly, and even Thomas softened, spending hours telling his grandson stories about the old days. Xavier was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with Nathan when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with an expression of such love that it made Amelia's heart ache. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management. Amelia discovered she had a talent for breeding horses, and she began developing a line of sturdy, intelligent mounts that became sought after throughout the territory. Xavier expanded the cattle operation and invested in improved breeding stock. Together they weathered drought and hard winters, good years and lean ones, building not just a successful business but a legacy. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara Margaret, arrived in the spring of 1880. She had Xavier's dark hair and Amelia's green eyes, and she was as sweet-tempered as her brother was rambunctious. 2 years later came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but fiercely determined once he set his mind to something. The years rolled past, full of work and laughter and the thousand small joys of family life. Amelia watched her children grow, teaching them reading and arithmetic at the kitchen table, watching Xavier teach them to ride and rope and care for the land. She saw Nathan develop his father's sense of fairness and leadership, Clara show an unexpected talent for drawing and painting. James proved to have a gift for working with horses that rivaled her own. Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep in 1883, and they buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains she had loved. Thomas followed 2 years later, and Xavier inherited the ranch fully, though in truth he had been running it for years. He immediately made Amelia a full legal partner, drawing up papers that gave her equal ownership, equal say in every decision. "It has always been ours together," he said when she protested that it was not necessary. "I am just making it official." Wyoming gained statehood in 1890, and Amelia and Xavier celebrated with their children and the ranch community that had become their extended family. Fort Laramie had grown from a frontier outpost into a proper town with schools and churches and businesses. The railroad had brought new prosperity, and the Broken Bee Ranch had grown with the changing times. In the evenings, Amelia and Xavier still sat on the front porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Their hands were more weathered now, their faces marked by years of sun and wind, but the love between them had only deepened. Xavier still looked at her the way he had that first day, like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "You ever regret it?" Amelia asked him one evening in the summer of 1895, as they watched Nathan and his new wife working horses in the corral and Clara teaching James's children to ride. "Coming out here, building this life." Xavier turned to her with a look of such warmth and love that it took her breath away even after nearly 2 decades of marriage. "My only regret is that I did not find you sooner. Everything else has been exactly what I wanted." "I was so scared that first day," Amelia admitted. "When I thought I was going to be sent to the fields like I did not matter, like my wants did not count. And then I told you that you could choose. You changed my life with those words." She leaned into him, his arm coming around her shoulders in the familiar, comforting way it had 1,000 times before. "You saw me, Xavier. You treated me like a person with value before you ever loved me, before you knew anything about me except that I deserved basic respect. That is the kind of man you are. That is why our children are growing up to be good, fair people who treat others with dignity." "We built something good here," Xavier said, looking out over the ranch that was their shared creation. "Not just a successful operation, but a place where people are treated right, where hard work is valued but so is kindness, where people have choices, like you gave me, like we give everyone." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That is the legacy I want to leave. Not just land and cattle, but the example of how to live with integrity." Amelia thought about the girl she had been, fresh off the wagon with nothing but a small trunk and desperate hope. She thought about how close she had come to a very different life, one where she would have been just another anonymous worker, laboring in fields until her body gave out. And she thought about the man who had seen her worth and given her freedom, who had loved her not despite her lack of fortune, but because of who she was as a person. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Xavier replied, his voice rough with emotion. "My partner, my wife, my heart." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their children's laughter drifting up from the corrals, the ranch they had built together settling into evening around them. It was not always easy, this life they had carved out of the wild Wyoming frontier. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of mutual respect and love, and it was exactly what they both had chosen. Nathan took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations as the years progressed, proving himself as capable and fair-minded as his father. Clara married a teacher from Cheyenne and divided her time between town and the ranch, her artwork gaining recognition throughout the region. James, true to his quiet nature, became the best horse trainer in 3 territories, developing a method of gentling horses that was both effective and humane. Amelia and Xavier moved into a smaller house on the property in 1900, leaving the main ranch house to Nathan and his growing family. But they remained active in the ranch's operations for years. They were in their 60s when the new century arrived, still riding together on Sunday mornings, still sitting on the porch in the evenings, still finishing each other's sentences and communicating with looks that their children found both amusing and touching. "They are still courting after all these years," Clara observed to her brothers one Thanksgiving when the whole family was gathered. "Look at them. Father just brought Mother flowers like he is still trying to win her over. He told me once that he never wanted her to forget how much she means to him," Nathan said, watching his parents walk arm in arm toward the barn. "That love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day." "He chose well," James said quietly, "and so did she. Look what they built together. Not just this ranch, but all of us. A whole family, a whole community. It started because Father gave Mother the freedom to choose her own path, and she chose him." The 3 siblings stood together, watching their parents disappear into the barn where Xavier was undoubtedly going to show Amelia some new foal or piece of equipment. After more than 25 years of marriage, he still wanted to share everything with her, still sought her opinion on every decision, still treated her as the equal partner she had always been. It was a cold January morning in 1908 when Xavier did not wake up. He had gone to sleep with his arms around Amelia as he had for 30 years, and sometime in the night his heart simply stopped. The doctor said it was peaceful, that he had felt no pain. But Amelia, waking to find him still and cold beside her, felt like the world had ended. She was 54 years old and had spent more than half her life with this man. He had been her husband, her partner, her best friend, the father of her children, the builder of her dreams. Without him, colors seemed duller, food tasteless, the future a vast and empty place. Her children gathered around her, along with grandchildren and the extended ranch family. They buried Xavier on the hill next to his Aunt Margaret, with a view of the mountains and the ranch he had loved. Nathan spoke at the service about his father's fairness and integrity. Clara read a poem she had written about love and loss. James simply stood by the grave with tears streaming down his face, one hand on his mother's shoulder. Amelia stood dry-eyed through it all, her grief too deep for tears. When everyone else had left, she remained by the grave, one hand resting on the cold stone marker. "You told me I could choose," she whispered to the wind and the mountains and the sky. "You gave me freedom and love and a life I never dreamed I could have. How do I choose to go on without you?" But even as she asked, she knew the answer. She went on because they had built something together that was bigger than either of them alone. She went on because their children needed her, because the ranch needed her, because Xavier would have wanted her to keep living fully and fearlessly the way she always had. So Amelia returned to the smaller house and to her work, throwing herself into the horse breeding program and the ranch accounts, spending time with her grandchildren, teaching them the things Xavier would have taught them. She rode every Sunday morning, sometimes with Nathan or James, but often alone, following the routes she and Xavier had taken together, talking to him in her head, feeling his presence in the land they had shaped together. Clara moved back to the ranch after her husband died in 1912, and she and Amelia grew even closer, spending evenings on the porch where Amelia and Xavier had spent so many hours. Amelia told her daughter stories about the early days, about arriving at the ranch with nothing and being told she would work the fields, about Xavier's intervention and his radical idea that she should choose her own path. "He changed everything for me," Amelia said, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Not just by loving me, though that was extraordinary enough, but by treating me like a person with agency before he ever felt anything for me romantically. By believing that I had worth just as I was." "You taught us to treat people that way too," Clara said, "both of you by example." "Your father was the best man I ever knew," Amelia said simply. "I was blessed to have 30 years with him." Amelia lived until 1920, dying peacefully at the age of 66 with her children and grandchildren around her. She had lived to see the end of the Old West and the beginning of a new, modern era. She had seen Wyoming transform from a raw frontier territory into an established state. She had seen her children build successful lives and her grandchildren grow into capable, kind adults who carried forward the values she and Xavier had instilled. They buried her next to Xavier on the hill, reuniting them after 12 years of separation. Nathan, now in his early 40s and silver-haired, spoke about his parents' partnership and love, about the legacy they had left not just in land and livestock, but in the way they had treated people and built community. "My father told my mother she could choose her own path," Nathan said to the gathered crowd of family and friends. "And she chose love. She chose partnership. She chose to build something beautiful and lasting. They gave that same freedom to everyone who worked for them, everyone who knew them. They proved that true strength is not about control but about empowerment, not about taking but about giving." The Broken Bee Ranch stands as a testament to what two people can build when they respect each other, love each other, and work together toward a common dream. The ranch continued to thrive under Nathan's management, and then, eventually, under his children. The Brennan name became synonymous with fair dealing and quality livestock throughout Wyoming and beyond. But more than that, it became a symbol of what was possible when people treated each other with dignity and respect, when love was built on a foundation of equality and choice. Years later, when Nathan's granddaughter asked him about the family history, he told her the story of how it all began. About a dusty woman from Philadelphia who arrived expecting one thing and was offered something completely different. About a young rancher who believed in giving people the freedom to choose their own paths. About two people who fell in love not despite their differences, but because they saw and valued each other truly. "It started with a choice," Nathan said. "Your great-great-grandfather Xavier told your great-great-grandmother Amelia that she could choose what work she wanted to do. That single act of respect changed everything. It allowed her to see him as a man worth loving, and it set the tone for everything that came after. They built the Broken Bee on that foundation of mutual respect and freedom, and it is why we are still here, still thriving, more than 50 years later." "What happened to the foreman who wanted to send her to the fields?" the granddaughter asked. "He left the ranch," Nathan said. "He could not adjust to Xavier's way of doing things, to treating workers as people rather than tools. Xavier replaced him with someone better, someone who understood that a ranch, like any community, functions best when everyone is valued and has a voice." The granddaughter looked out over the ranch, at the sprawling pastures and the distant mountains, at the legacy her ancestors had built. "They must have loved each other very much." "They did," Nathan confirmed. "But more than that, they respected each other. They were partners in every sense of the word. And that respect, that equality, that was the real foundation of their love. Everything else grew from that." On the hill overlooking the ranch, two gravestones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Xavier Brennan and Amelia Grayson Brennan. The inscriptions were simple: loving husband and father for Xavier, loving wife and mother for Amelia. But those who knew their story understood that the words could not capture the depth of what they had shared. the legacy they had created, the example they had set. They had lived during a time of great change and uncertainty, in a place that was wild and often unforgiving. They had faced challenges and losses, struggles and setbacks. But through it all, they had held fast to the principles they established on that first day when Xavier told Amelia she could choose her own path. Respect, equality, freedom. Love built on the solid foundation of seeing and valuing each other as whole human beings. It was a simple enough philosophy, but revolutionary in its time and still powerful decades later. They told her she would work the fields, not the house, and Xavier said she would do whatever she chose. With those words, he had not just changed her life, but set in motion a story of love and partnership that would echo through generations. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Wyoming grasslands and the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold, some said you could still feel their presence on that ranch, still sense the love that had built something beautiful and lasting from nothing but courage, determination, and the simple, profound belief that everyone deserves the freedom to choose their own path.